Let's go to that breaking news out of the Middle East, where the Israeli Defense Force says it is preparing to launch what it calls an unprecedented attack against Hamas in southern Gaza. The IDF has now issued a major evacuation warning, telling all residents around the city of Khan Yunis to leave. Chris Sidoti is a member of the UN Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory and Israel, and he joins me now. Chris, thank you for your time this evening. Now, Chris, in November last year, the UN Special Committee found Israel's warfare methods in Gaza consistent with genocide, including the use of starvation as a weapon of war. So, given what is happening in Gaza today and over the past few weeks, my first question to you is whether a genocide is currently occurring.
Our Commission of Inquiry hasn't yet got to that point. That's a question that we are looking at. But certainly for a year now, we have been saying that the siege on Gaza, the use of food as a weapon of war, is a war crime, and it's a crime against humanity. And everything that has happened since we first made that statement, came to that conclusion in May last year, has confirmed that the policy of the Israeli government and the Israeli military constitutes a crime against humanity and a war crime. Food should not be used as a weapon of war, particularly against a civilian population.
Now, how can those who are causing this be held responsible? Because we've not seen anything of that sort happening since the war began.
We have already seen the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants, both for the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and for the former Defence Minister Gallant. That's a start. The court has indicated that it's also looking at arrest warrants against others, both on the side of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and in relation to the Israeli government and military. So accountability is an international issue, and although at the moment it's not possible to see Netanyahu or Gallant before the International Criminal Court anytime soon, these arrest warrants are not time limited, and accountability is always on the cards. It is always a necessity, and indeed I'm quite confident that we'll see it happen.
Okay. Now, on Israel's part, it has always rejected the claims, especially when Amnesty International did claim that genocide was taking place, saying that Amnesty failed to recognize Hamas's genocidal intent of eradicating Jews. What do you make of such a response from Israel?
Well, firstly, let me say that many organisations have already looked at this question of genocide and have come to the conclusion that Israeli policy and practice in Gaza constitutes genocide. And the first organisations to do that were Israeli human rights organisations. They produced very detailed reports. They were followed by Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. As I say, we have not ourselves at this point completed our analysis. But we have to be very sceptical about anything the Israeli government and military says. As you mentioned earlier, they have been denying that there is any starvation in Gaza. And yet every single international organisation, UN, governmental, non-governmental, on the ground in Gaza reports what is happening and says there is starvation. The International Committee of the Red Cross, one of the most highly respected and one of the most conservative organisations, has described the situation in Gaza as hell on earth. That is an unprecedented statement from the ICRC. The simple truth is that the Israeli government lies, and it lies all the time. Not even President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio believe anything that Netanyahu says anymore.
And so what do you make when Benjamin Netanyahu and his government says that, they will introduce basic amounts of food back to enter Gaza? I mean, that phrase, basic food to enter back. So it begs the question of what's been happening over the past few months in terms of the desperate situation of the need for food in Gaza.
I agree with the comment that Matthew made earlier in this program, where he described this as a PR offensive on the part of the Israeli government. The siege of Gaza, the total siege, is now into its 80th day. But the siege of Gaza in one form or another dates back 20 years, dates back 20 years. The people in Gaza have been subjected to sanctions of one kind or another for a very long time. But the siege now, this latest total siege of the last 80 days, is without precedent. It is certainly a very serious situation and one which the international community has to address.
Of course, with Israel now saying it will be expanding its ground offensive in Gaza, is a complete takeover of Gaza imminent, and might we then see a similar situation to the West Bank? And is that a long-term goal of Israel?
It's certainly moving in that direction. It's certainly moving to the direction where there will be a permanent Israeli military presence in Gaza, and the people of Gaza already living in one of the most overpopulated areas on the planet will live in a smaller area in even worse conditions than they have endured in the past. The area of Gaza, the total area of Gaza, is half the size of Canberra, just to give you some comparison. 2.3 million people live in it, and 75% of that territory has now been classified as military security zones, and the Gazans have been forced out of it, are being forced out of it. So they have left 2.3 million people, 25% of the territory, which at its full extent was half the size of Canberra.
And so the question is, can anyone stop something like this from happening? Because, we're also seeing that the world's biggest military powers are either supporting Israel's offensive or simply voicing their calls for a ceasefire.
Everyone is now calling for a ceasefire. Everyone is now expressing concern about the starvation in Gaza. It's well past time that words have to be put into action. The time for rhetoric is long past. We need action from the UN Security Council, and we need action from the United States in particular, Europe as well, and even countries like Australia. There are things that we can all do but have not been doing. And so we have to move beyond rhetoric to action to place greater pressure on the Israeli government.
Yes, is there any hopes of that, though? Because we know that there are parties in the UN Security Council that will veto any moves if it's made then.
Well, the only party that will veto in the Security Council in relation to Israel is the United States.
Yes.
And we are hearing increasing frustration. The simple fact is that Netanyahu is not listening to President Trump. He doesn't give a damn what President Trump says. And it's about time that President Trump acted towards Israel like he acts towards everybody else in the world, expressing his frustration at not being listened to. So the United States, perhaps, may be moving to a point where it considers action on Israel necessary.
Yes, and you spoke about international rhetoric. Then what have you made then of the federal government's response here in Australia?
I've been very pleased with how the federal government has been shifting its position over the last 2 years in the United Nations and has been voting far more positively, far more responsibly in UN forums. But that's not enough. There are other actions that we can take and that we need to take. In particular, looking in far greater detail, far more rigorously at what actions Australia is taking, what policies or practices we have that may be providing aid or support for the maintenance of the occupation and of the settlement policy and of the war in Gaza. We have not seriously examined that question, and we should have done so once the International Court of Justice in July last year said that the occupation was unlawful, it needed to stop, and there was an obligation on all individual countries to examine ways in which they may be aiding or supporting the occupation, and they should desist in those actions. Now, we need to take that step. We need to examine Israeli policies and practices and how Australia is contributing or supporting to them, and act in response to that examination.
Okay, Chris Sidoti, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thanks, Girish. It's good to talk to you.